Our soldiers are trustworthy. They can deploy in the homeland, and American citizens can be confident that there will be no abuses.
Matt Rothschild.
Well, you know, that doesn't really satisfy me, and I don't think it should satisfy your listeners and your audience, Amy, because, you know, our people in the field in Iraq, some of them have not behaved up to the highest standards, and a lot of police forces in the United States who've been using these tasers have used them inappropriately. The whole question here about what the Pentagon is doing patrolling in the United States gets to a real heart of the matter, which is, do we have a democracy here? I mean, there is a law in the books called the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act that says that the President of the United States as Commander-in-Chief cannot put the military on our streets. And this is a violation of that, it seems to me. President Bush tried to get around this act a couple years ago in a Defense Authorization Act that he signed that got rid of some of those restrictions. And then last year in the new Defense Authorization Act, thanks to the work of Senator Patrick Leahy and Kit Bond of Missouri, that was stripped away, and so the president isn't supposed to be using the military in this fashion, and though the president, true to form, appended a signing statement to that saying he's not going to be governed by that. So here we have a situation where the president of the United States has been aggrandizing his power, and this gives him a whole brigade unit to use against U.S. citizens here at home.
Colonel Michael Boatner, what about the Posse Comitatus Act, and where does that fit in when U.S. troops are deployed on U.S. soil?
It absolutely governs in every instance. We are not allowed to help enforce the law. We don't do that. Every time we get a request, and again, this kind of a deployment is defense support to civil authority under the National Response Framework and the Stafford Act, and we do it all the time in response to hurricanes, floods, fires, and things like that. But again, you know, if we review the requirement that comes to us from civil authority and it has any complexion of law enforcement whatsoever, it gets rejected and pushed back because it's not lawful.
Matthew Rothschild, does this satisfy you, editor of the Progressive magazine?
No, it doesn't. And one of the reasons it doesn't is not by what Boatner was saying right there, but what President Bush has been doing. And if we looked at National Security Presidential Directive 51 that he signed on May 9th of 2007, Amy, this gives the president enormous powers to declare a catastrophic emergency and to bypass our regular system of laws, essentially to impose a form of martial law. And if you look at that National Security Presidential Directive, what it says that in any incident where there is extraordinary disruption of a whole range of things, including our economy, the president can declare a catastrophic emergency. Well, we're having these huge disturbances in our economy. President Bush could today pick up that National Security Directive 51 and say, we're in a catastrophic emergency, I'm going to declare martial law, and I'm going to use this combat brigade to enforce it.
Colonel Michael Boatner.
The only exception that I know of is the Insurrection Act. It's something that is very unlikely to be invoked. In my 30-year career, it's only been used once in the L.A. riots, and it was a widespread situation of lawlessness and violence. And the governor of the state requested that the president provide support. And that's a completely different situation. The forces available to do that are in every service in every part of the country, and it's completely unrelated to the this consequence management force that we're talking about.
You mentioned governors, and I was just looking at a piece by Jeff Stein. He is the national security editor of Congressional Quarterly, talking about Homeland Security. And he said, safely tucked into the $526 billion defense bill, it easily crossed the goal line on the last day of September. The language doesn't just brush aside a liberal Democrat slated to take over the Judiciary Committee. This was a piece written last year. It runs over the backs of the governors, 22 of whom are Republican. The governors waved red flags about the measure on August 1st, 2007, sending letters of protest from their Washington office to the Republican chairs and ranking Democrats on the House and Senate Armed Services Committees. No response. So they petitioned the party heads on the Hill. The letter, signed by every member of the National Governors Association, said this provision was drafted without consultation or input from governors and represents an unprecedented shift in authority from governors to the federal government. Colonel Michael Boatner.
That's in the political arena. That has nothing to do with my responsibilities or what I'm was asked to talk about here with regard to supporting civil authority in the homeland.
Matthew Rothschild.
Well, this gets to what Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont was so concerned about, that with Northcom and with perhaps this unit, and I want to call Senator Leahy's office today and ask him about this, you have the usurpation of the governor's role, of the National Guard's role, and it's given straight to the Pentagon in some of these instances, and that's very alarming. That was alarming to almost every governor, if not every governor in the country when Bush tried to do that end around about the Posse Comitatus Act. So I think these are real concerns.
Matt Rothschild, the Democratic and Republican conventions were quite amazing displays of force at every level, from the local police on to the state troopers to, well, in the Republican convention, right on to troops just back from Iraq in their Army fatigues. Did this surprise you?
It did. It surprised me also that Northcom itself was involved in intelligence sharing with local police officers in St. Paul. I mean, what in the world is Northcom doing looking at what some of the protesters are involved in? And you had infiltration up there, too. But what we have going on in this country is we have infiltration and spying that goes on not only at the, well, all the way from the campus police practically, Amy, up to the Pentagon and the National Security Agency. We're becoming a police state here.
Colonel Michael Boatner, a tall order here. Could you respond?
Well, that's incorrect. We did not participate in any intelligence collection. We were up there in support of the U.S. Secret Service. We provided some explosive ordnance disposal support of the event. But I'd like to go back and say that, again...
Could you explain what explain again what was their role there?
They were just doing routine screens and scans of the area in advance of this kind of a vulnerable event. It's pretty standard support to a national special security event.
And are you saying there was absolutely no intelligence sharing?
That's correct. That is correct.
Mm-hmm.
But even that, I mean, now the Pentagon is doing sweeps of areas before a political convention. That used to be law enforcement's job. That used to be domestic civil law enforcement job. It's now being taken over by the Pentagon. That should concern us.
Why is that, Colonel Michael Boatner? Why is the Pentagon doing it, not local law enforcement?
Well, that's because of the scale and the availability of support. DOD is the only force that has the kind of capability. I mean, we're talking about dozens and dozens of dog detection teams, and so for anything on this large a scale, the Secret Service comes to DOD with a standard Economy Act request for assistance.
Boatner, in the Republican convention, these troops just back from Fallujah, what about issues of, for example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, my sense is that that's something that the services handle very well. There's a long track record of great support in the homeland. If those soldiers were National Guard soldiers, I have no visibility of that. But for the active duty forces, citizens can be confident that if they're employed in the homeland, that they'll be reliable, accountable, and take care of their families and fellow citizens in good form.
Last word, Matthew Rothschild. 10 seconds.
Well, this granting of the Pentagon a special unit to be involved in U.S. patrol is something that should alarm all of us. And it's very important to the Army. General Casey, Army Chief of Staff, was at a drill exercise for this group just last week.
We leave it there. We got to leave it there. Thank you to Matt Rothschild and Colonel Michael Boatner. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.